Hi, this is Mark Leslie, and welcome to Free Friday Frights. Today is Friday, June 29th, and the story I'm going to be reading to you is a relatively short one. It is a creepy horror story. It's a very short one, and it's called Almost. So, let's get to the story. Almost, by Mark Leslie. The dark woods were far from still. A strong wind made the tops of the trees bow. A low howl accompanied the wind as it forced its way around the branches and through the leaves. Orange and yellow corpses fluttered from the trees to the ground, never to be buried, merely trampled upon. Muffled by the call of the wind, Dale Garrison crunched upon the newly fallen leaves as he ran through the forest. He stumbled to a tree and leaned against it, listening, watching. Out of breath, he looked back over his shoulder. He'd gotten this far without them picking up his trail. But he couldn't rest long. The dogs would soon pick up his scent and they'd be on his tail again. The horrid cost of freedom these days, Dale thought, running his forearm across his sweaty brow. He couldn't run like this all night. He'd have to find a ride or something, get out of his Sunnyside institution uniform and flee the state before word of his escape got out. It had been 20 minutes since he'd been free. No doubt the local station had broadcast his escape by now. He had to be very careful. He was an easily identifiable suspect. The wind howled louder, and he thought that he could pick out the sounds of barking in the distance. Still out of breath, Dale stumbled forward and broke into a lurching run. A sharp pain stabbed through his side as he tried to ignore it. The tempting smell of freedom, like a carrot held before a starving horse, guided him onward. Just when he thought he could bear the pain no longer, Dale staggered to a clearing, and before him he found exactly what he needed. A pale gray Chevrolet was parked in the clearing on a hill overlooking a spectacular view of the town below. Dale could detect two figures inside the car through the steamy windows. He slowly approached the car, crouching and trying to keep his breathing quiet. He hadn't yet figured out how he would overpower the people inside, as tired as he was, but he knew that he didn't have much time. Nearing the driver's door, he remained low and peered in through the window. A glance at them would tell him if they would be much of a threat to his freedom. Things hadn't changed much, Dale thought, as he regarded a couple of teenagers making out. The male, thin and short, had his face pressed up against a blonde-haired female's face. Her hands danced up and down his back to the sound of a pop song on the radio. The male's hands deftly worked at unbuttoning the female's blouse. The car had been idling. Dale could see the keys in the ignition. Conflicting thoughts ran through Dale's mind. He wanted to continue watching. The sudden excitement of adolescent sex brought him memories of his own youth. It had been almost a decade since he'd saw real live breasts. But he needed to get the teens out of the car so that he could escape. As Dale watched, feeling a stirring in his groin, he calculated his next move. Just as the boy had the girl's blouse open and cupped her breast between his hands, the muffled voice of the radio announcer interrupted the song. Dale moved to the back of the car, his plan already formed. All that he had to do was open the passenger door, pull the girl out from the car, and threaten to kill her if the boy didn't get out. He could then slip into the car and speed away. From the woods came the distinct sound of barking. They were getting closer. Dale moved quickly around the back of the car and, in his haste, tripped over something. He landed on his left hand and it twisted beneath him. He let out a yelp. From within the car, the girl screamed. Shit, Dale thought, cradling his left arm to his chest. The barking dogs were louder as they echoed through the trees. As Dale slid forward on his left side, he could hear the boy and girl arguing within the car. By the time he reached the passenger door, the arguing seemed to be over. As Dale reached forward and grasped the door handle with his right hand, the car started moving. Searing pain shot through Dale's right arm as the car peeled away. He cradled the bloody stump at the end of his right arm to his chest and watched the car speed away down the dirt road, heading back to town. Goddamn cheap doctors at the institution, Dale thought, listening as the barking dogs neared the edge of the clearing. They had the technology to provide him with a workable plastic right hand after the accident at the prison shop, but he was a criminal. He moaned as he lay on the ground, the exhaust and dust from the car settling on his face. The dogs burst through the trees, the excited shouts of the cops not far behind. They had the technology, but they wouldn't waste it, or the money for that matter, on a criminal slated for death row. Goddamn cheap doctors. He'd almost gotten away. He would have been able to open the door in time if not for that useless prosthetic hand. As the first dog reached him, Dale vaguely wondered when those kids would discover the hook stuck in the door handle. So that is a short story called Almost. And the story itself was inspired by those old tales from the hook, the old urban myths or the stories that people share around campfires. And one of the stories of the hook was the story, of course, of the hook stuck in the car door. The boy and the girl are there. They hear the announcement. She insists on going away. He's finally upset, and then he just peels away because he knows he's not going to get lucky. And then when he goes to let her out at home and he goes around the door to open the door, there's a hook stuck in the door. And that's kind of really a chilling, disturbing story. There are other versions of the story where they both get murdered and the guy with the hook kills them. And there's really eerie ones. But this was the original classic tale of the hook. And I wrote it actually back in university when I should have been studying for an exam, but that's usually when I was most inspired to write. And I thought it'd be interesting to see the story from the point of view of the criminal. He didn't actually mean the kids any harm. He just wanted to get away, even though, yes, I guess he was a murderer. And I thought that would be interesting. So I did try to keep the fact that his right hand was a hook hidden from the reader until the very, very end. Some people may pick that out earlier, and then they can kind of pick up that anticipation of what the story really is. But I kind of enjoy taking a trope, a classic trope like that, and trying to look at it from a new angle. And that's what Almost was. Almost had never, I'd never sold it to a market. I ended up publishing it in 2004 when I put together One Hand Screaming, which was a collection of mostly previously published stories. Almost was one of the tales that I just threw in there into one of the sections that contained really, really short stories and poems. And it ended up getting picked up. Somebody from McGraw-Hill Ryerson, a Canadian academic publisher, contacted me, and the email had a photocopy of Almost from a print version of the book that they had bought. And this book was really, it's really only available print on demand, but available through Ingram. And was available non-returnable, so it may have actually been in stock in a few select stores, or it was set up as returnable. And what happened was it was a photocopy of the story, and it said, we'd like to reach out for you because we'd like to include this story in a high school text that'll be used to study short fiction and basically the story arc, because it's a really, really short story that has a couple of very specific elements to be studied. They did ask that I actually take out a few of the more adult references, and I think change goddamn to rats or darn or something like that, and take out him cupping her breasts and Dale getting all horny when he sees the kids. So I softened a little bit of that, and it was interesting because every time that story gets picked up into these custom-made textbooks that teachers, where they select the stories and which ones they want, I get a royalty check, which is kind of cool. So this was a story I had never published anywhere except in One Hand Screaming, and then I had it available. It's now available that high school students are reading, which I think is kind of a cool thing. Other neat thing about Almost is I used an audio soundtrack for it on Book Tracker, where people can go and read it for free using the app or on Book Tracker, and then you get that ambient sound in the back, which I think is kind of a neat one, and it was fun to experiment with some of the sound effects in the background. The dark woods were far from still. A strong wind made the tops of the trees bow. A low howl accompanied the wind as it forced its way around the branches and through the leaves. Orange and yellow corpses fluttered from the trees to the ground, never to be buried, merely trampled upon. Muffled by the call of the wind, Dale Garrison crunched upon the newly fallen leaves as he ran through the forest. He stumbled to a tree and leaned against it, listening, watching. Out of breath, he looked back over his shoulder. He'd gotten this far without them picking up his trail. But he couldn't rest long. The dogs would soon pick up his scent and they'd be on his tail again. The horrid cost of freedom these days, Dale thought, running his forearm across his sweaty brow. He couldn't run like this all night. He'd have to find a ride or something, get out of his Sunnyside institution uniform and flee the state before word of his escape got out. It had been 20 minutes since he'd been free. No doubt the local station had broadcast his escape by now. He had to be very careful. He was an easily identifiable suspect. The wind howled louder, and he thought that he could pick out the sounds of barking in the distance. Still out of breath, Dale stumbled forward and broke into a lurching run. A sharp pain stabbed. So that was almost. I hope you enjoyed this week's Free Friday Frights. Hope you enjoyed some of the audio sound effects that come with the video. And this is Mark Lefebvre, not coming to you live because I had to pre-record this because of I'm in a Wi-Fi dead spot when I'm doing this. So I'm trying to get this recorded, produced, and then pushed out to the internet before Friday is over. I hope you have a fantastic Friday here in Canada. It's about to be Canada Day, which is July 1st, where we celebrate the 151st birthday of our country, and our friends to the south in the U.S. will be celebrating their Independence Day on July 4th, just a few days later. So happy Canada Day, happy Independence Day if you're in North America for either one of those two. Just happy weekend for everyone else in the world. Thanks for checking out Free Friday Frights, and have a fantastic weekend.